delighted to be here with you, and I'm delighted that we are celebrating Eid tonight, and I think it's going to be a very big event with many members of the community. And one of the things I'll be saying is I will be talking about the centrality of the Muslim community to my vision of one nation, a united country of people of all faiths and all backgrounds. I'm incredibly proud of the representation that we already have in the Labour Party from the Muslim and BAME community. But I'm also proud that if you look at the parliamentary candidates we've selected, I believe we have a record number of people from ethnic minority backgrounds as part of our candidates, more than ever before, and I look forward to us increasing that representation after the general election. And the reason why it matters to me is because it's right in principle, but it's also right because we must look like the country we seek to serve, and that is central to me in for the Labour Party. Of course, we meet for this Eid celebration at a time of terrible occurrences in the rest of the world, and in particular in Israel and in Gaza. And let me just say some words about that. I have said repeatedly that I condemn the rocket attacks from Hamas. I condemn the murder of the Israeli teenagers, and Israel has a right to defend itself. But I cannot justify or defend what we are seeing unfolding in Gaza and the killing of innocent Palestinian women and children, and this terrible rising death toll. And that's why we warned that an Israeli incursion into Gaza would be wrong and counterproductive, and I think that tragically events have vindicated this. I think that what needs to happen now with the utmost urgency, as the international community is increasingly saying, is we need to see a ceasefire, and we need to see meaningful discussions around a two-state solution. But it's the tragic and terrible events that we're seeing unfolding in Gaza, and clearly that will be part of the background to the very, very sad and terrible background to the events this evening. Look, I've never been in favour of boycotts, and I think particularly at this sensitive time, I think what we need to concentrate on now is both sides drawing back from this terrible cycle of violence. We need a ceasefire on both sides with the utmost urgency, and that has got to be the priority, and that has got to be the focus. I understand the incredible distress and anger that there is about what is occurring. My focus, and I believe the focus of the government, should be on saying to both sides, this violence must stop, this cycle of violence must end. And that's certainly what I've been saying the last few days, and that's certainly what I'll be continuing to say. I understand the deep concern there is in Israel about security, and I'm a friend of Israel, but I take a different view from the Israeli government on this issue, a very different view, because I do not believe that Israel's actions will increase its security. I fear it will make Israel more vulnerable, because whenever we see the loss of innocent life, the danger is, the risk is, it recruits more people to Hamas. Hamas is a terrible terrorist organization, but I really fear that this cycle of violence and Israel's actions is deeply counterproductive. It's not just, I don't just oppose it, but I feel it's deeply counterproductive for Israel. So what I would be saying to both sides is they must draw back from this violence. That means Hamas must cease its rocket attacks on Israel, but that also I believe that Israel should observe a ceasefire as well. I think the vast majority of the Muslim community does certainly not want to see a rise in extremism, but that's why I think it's quite important that I, certainly speaking for myself, I speak out about the events that we're seeing, because I think that what unites us right across this country, whatever our faith, whatever our background, is actually much stronger than what divides us. I think anybody looking at the events in Gaza will be deeply distressed by what is happening. So I think it's very, very important that I speak out on these issues, and I say to people right across this country, including people from the Muslim community, that I want to see that ceasefire. I share the deep distress about what is happening in Gaza. I've made my position clear both about Hamas and their appalling rocket attacks, but also about Israel's actions. And that's why the violence needs to cease. The issue of immigration, look, we need an immigration policy that has proper controls. And let me take the two parts in turn. On the issue of EU migration, we've said that for new countries coming into the European Union, we want longer transitional controls. And that's partly learning the lessons from the past, from the last Labour government, and I think that's important. I think that the other thing I would say is that what we've learnt also is that this is a matter of control, and it's control on illegal immigration as well. But it's also about how do we make this vision, because I believe that immigration benefits the country, how do we make this vision work for everybody? Now, I think that's partly about making sure that we have proper integration, and that means people having the chance to learn English, for example. But I also think it's about making sure that in the workplace, we prevent people's wages being driven down. Because, I think when people are concerned about immigration, it isn't prejudice. I think it is actually genuine concern about what's happening in their community. Sometimes about the pace of change, sometimes what we see happening in the workplace. So I think the combination of proper controls, making sure that we have integration, showing that we can have proper standards in the workplace, I think that's the right combination for the immigration policy. Fundamentally because we want to create a country that works for all and not just a few, not just a few people at the top of our society. And when I think about all of the challenges that this country faces, you've got the government that says everything's fixed and the economy's fixed. You probably hear that from Mr. Cameron and George Osborne quite a lot. What I see is a country where people are working harder for longer, for less money, and they're finding their living standards squeezed. People are worried about their kids and what kind of life they're going to have. If people are running a small business, they find that the banks aren't working for them. And I think people want a Prime Minister who will wake up every day and think, how do I make life easier for the ordinary person in Britain, not just for the wealthiest? The Conservatives believe that actually, as long as the wealthiest are okay, the wealth will trickle down to everybody else. I think that's a failed economic theory. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to work for the country. I don't think it's going to actually create the kind of country and the kind of Britain that we need. I think Britain will work best when it works for everybody. And that's our vision, and that's what we offer. And we have, I think it's very interesting, we're a couple of months away from our conference. If you think about what Labour's laid out, whether it's jobs for young people, or building 200,000 homes a year, or freezing energy bills, or raising the minimum wage, or policies on rents for people renting their homes, or better childcare and nursery provision, we have an agenda which is going to make a real concrete difference to people. So that's why I'd urge people to vote Labour. Well, I think there's a couple of things that we need to do. Look, first of all, we need a job for every young person, because we've got to get young people back to work. And among some sections, some ethnic minority communities, there's higher youth unemployment than in other communities, and we've got to deal with that. I think that the small business issue is incredibly important, and we've got to fundamentally change our banking system so it really works for small businesses. I'm really proud of the fact that Labour is now the party not only saying reform the banks, but cut business rates for small businesses. And when I go around and talk to small businesses, I say, look, Labour is genuinely going into the next election saying we are the party of small business. We're the party that will make a difference to small businesses in this country. And then across every issue, we've got to make sure that we meet the equality agenda, both in terms of economic equality and equality by way of background, and I'm deeply committed to that. And then the final thing I'd say is that one way of making sure that happens, it's a concern for all of us, but one other way of making sure that happens is by having equality in our politics, and that means proper representation. And we'll furnish you with the figures, but I'm incredibly proud of not just the BAME representation we already have, but what we're going to have, I believe, after the next election.